Soulless YouTuber intro, let's go. Superhero movies have dominated media for well over 2 decades now, raking in billions of dollars. And I wanted to talk about that. And there's a TikToker, I think that's the official, is it ticking the talk? How do you?
TikToker, ticking, whatever you want to say.
Who has actually been doing something I find to be a quite impressive challenge. Binging literally every superhero movie ever made, starting with Superman, and I believe he just finished up to Black Widow, so it's been amazing to watch, and I have been watching them basically as they come out because I'm a super nerd, so this is pretty much the two very different experiences you can have for consuming these, and I thought, hey, let's give it a conversation go. How's it going, Narwhal?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on the channel. I'm really excited. But I should clarify right off the bat, I did, for the sake of content, I did have to lie a little bit. I've actually seen I saw 8 superhero movies before I started the challenge, but I knew that for the sake of content, it would sound a lot cooler and people would be a lot more engaged if I had said I hadn't seen any of them.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
So the 8 that I had seen was The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, Doctor Strange, Deadpool, Thor Ragnarok, Aquaman, Split, and Venom, which clearly they don't really relate to each other very much.
This just raises questions of what's it like to see Thor Ragnarok without context.
It was very confusing.
So this time through, did you enjoy the movie more because of the context of the MCU?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the reasons I never really watched them in the first place or got into them was just because, I don't know, for me, like, cheesiness and like it was always a turnoff for some reason, and I didn't really have the ability to suspend my disbelief, but all my friends always got mad because I would never give the movies a chance. So I was like, you know what, fine, I'll start from the beginning and give them all a chance. And I have to say, I understand the hype now. They're still not necessarily my genre of choice, I would say, but I think actually watching from the beginning to the end, I actually really love some of the characters now. So,
okay, I gotta ask, when did you have your like first real nerd superhero moment where you had to be like, of course Thor would beat Captain? Like, did you have that moment where you suddenly were like, oh shit, I care?
Yeah, the first time I really remember caring is my dad walked in during, I was watching, I think it was the second Iron Man movie, and he was like, oh, what's this? Because my parents were never really into them and never watched them, which I think is part of the reason why I never watched them growing up. But I actually had the urge to explain to my dad who Tony Stark was and like his background and how he got to this point. And like, usually I was like, why would I ever care about talking about Iron Man? Because I'm just not into that. But yeah, it was really fun. It was awesome.
So there's the DCEU and then there's Marvel. I think of DC as a whole as the king of like 3 to 6 out of 10. Marvel's the king of like 6 to 8, and then DC comes back in with like the 9s and 10s because they have like the Dark Knight, which isn't the EU, but still. So which do you prefer after going through? Are you a Marvel guy or are you a DC guy?
I think when it's all said and done, I'd probably go with Marvel, which I feel like is so basic. And I really wanted to love the DCEU. I had heard that, oh, the MCU is funnier, it's more colorful, it's just overall more enjoyable, but that's just what I've heard from my friends. And I don't know, so I gave them an equal chance, but I just do feel that, I don't know, I think it was harder for me to connect to Zack Snyder's style of movies where they're darker, grittier, slower, generally speaking.
See, I have the unpopular opinion where I prefer when Marvel leans into the goofy. I don't like their more serious movies. Like, so many people, you know, they prefer when they try to be gritty, but I'm like, I'm here watching a tree punch someone. Like, it's okay to make some jokes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I really felt like, to me, Guardians of the Galaxy was probably the most fun movie in the MCU, and I think that for me, that was when Marvel was at its peak, when it tries to be a comedy and just have fun and not take itself too seriously.
Well, and they have the comedy chops of Paul Rudd, Chris Pratt, Chris Hemsworth, Robert Downey. Like, they have these people who are so good at comedy. When they aren't utilizing that way, I'm almost like, you're wasting talent.
Exactly. And I actually just made a video about Ant-Man, and I just think that if they casted anyone other than Paul Rudd, I don't think it would have been nearly as fun of a movie. He's just so great. Like, he makes that movie, in my opinion. This obviously isn't part of the MCU or DCEU, but I watched Super with Rainn Wilson last night, which I had heard a lot of people say some wild things about it, and I just that movie took so many risks, and I really felt like, I don't know, I connected when anytime there was a movie that felt like, although it might not be the best, it definitely took some risks, and I don't know, I really love that.
See, that's to me like my favorite superhero movies, the ones that really do stand out as something different. Like it doesn't feel like a superhero movie. Anything, it feels like a mentally ill guy working through his problems, and he happens to be pretending to be a superhero. Like, those are the ones I prefer the most. Like the Joker, I'm sure you just watched as well.
Definitely. And I think that on the opposite end of that, for me, I think people were surprised that I never really liked any of the Captain America movies too much. I can see how objectively they're great films, and I can see why people who are diehard fans of superhero movies love it. But to me, for whatever reason, Captain America felt like the polar opposite, in the sense that he was so exactly what I envision when I think of a superhero movie. I mean, obviously I can't complain, but a note I wrote down was like, it's so superhero-y. Like, the way he talks and just the way it's written, that personally I didn't connect with as much as a movie like, for example, Ant-Man, or like the original Iron Man, where it's just everything feels... I mean, from what I read, actually, the first Iron Man was a lot of improv. And I don't know, to me, those performances that feel just more grounded and realistic, I guess, I like those a lot more.
I think that's why Captain America, in my opinion, is more interesting when he's actually conflicting with other superheroes, because he has this like moral, righteous rigidness. And if you put that against Iron Man, who is, you know, a reformed alcoholic just guy doing whatever the hell he wants, it kind of makes for more interesting conflict than like Captain America versus Red Skull. You don't really think about that. Pretty clear cut, like who's in the good and bad there.
Yeah, definitely.
I had some more challenging questions for you, if you're willing to go for your hottest takes. What do you think is the most overhyped superhero movie?
I think the most overrated, in my personal opinion, was Captain America, the first Avenger, like the very first one, because, I don't know, I think part of it is people were hyping it up for so long. They're saying, oh my God, you're going to love Captain America. He's an amazing guy. Like, he's so awesome. And I don't know, I just didn't connect with it. I didn't really care for, like, seeing him as, like, a young, like, when he was young and scrawny. I don't know, it just didn't do anything for me emotionally, and I really wanted to love him, but I don't know why I didn't like it, but I just didn't.
I can see where you're coming from. I don't think it's my most overhyped, but it's my dad's, like, one of his favorite, and I think that perfectly falls into what Captain America is. He's a lot of people's dad's favorite, and so I get the appeal. I understand why people like it, but like the conflict of that movie never really pulled at me in any significant way. Mine's a bit more controversial. The Captain America Winter Soldier, I think, is actually one of the worst MCU movies. I don't like it that much, and like everyone loves it, and I'm like, why? The action's cool, but the Winter Soldier reveal is so obvious, but it leads to just scene after scene of exposition dump, and just there's a guy in a computer. I don't like that. As somebody who's a software engineer, I refuse to believe in like the 80s they coded something that put this guy's brain in a computer.
I had a question for you, because you're very into, obviously, all the superheroes and like fantasy and novels. Do you feel that people sometimes get blinded by either nostalgia or more of like the community that comes along with the MCU? I don't know, because as an outsider, I always felt that, and as I was watching through it, I felt like some of the movies, in my opinion, were just average, yet people feel that the community aspect of seeing it with your friends in a theater and like all these things, to me, that feels like something separate from the movie itself. It seems like kind of the culture. Do you think that, like, what's your stance on that? Do you think that if the culture is amazing, like, does that make the movie objectively better? Or do you think sometimes people get blinded and like think that something's better because of the environment they were in when they saw it?
So absolutely that is a thing. Like, because I saw Infinity War opening night in the theater, and I remember just feeling that energy of just like everyone's going nuts. They're loving it. When Cap walks out, people stood up and threw popcorn. It was amazing. And then I rewatched it later on my own. And I was like, that's fine. I was like, it's a perfectly fine superhero movie. I think nostalgia is a good way to put it, but there's also just because it's so prevalent in like our day to day and there's such an infatuation with it, I think a lot of people just don't think of it as harshly as they do a lot of other media. Like if you watch the new Scorsese film, you watch a new Tarantino film, you have a bar that's very different than your bar for an MCU movie. Because like you're like, okay, for an MCU movie, you're going to see hot people, explosions, fights, and some character stuff thrown in throughout. You know, you're not expecting the deep cinematic experience of, Steven Spielberg's next huge project.
Definitely. And I think that for me, that's something that I had a hard time getting over. I don't know, a lot of my friends were saying, when you go into these movies, maybe you haven't wanted to watch them in the past because you're not willing to just accept them for what they are. Like, I would always take them so seriously, and I think a lot of times my friends were like, dude, just go in, realize it's going to be goofy sometimes and it's going to be a little cheesy, but that's kind of the point. And I feel like this challenge made me appreciate that a lot more.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then there's this other angle where you have to remember, like, you're watching a corporate product that's trying to appeal to the largest possible audience. That's why you're not going to see these movies ever say anything particularly powerful. They just have these themes of love, togetherness, friendship, anti-evil, bad guy that you can assign to whatever you don't agree in. That's why I really respect when creators are able to come in with those constraints and still make something very interesting. Like James Gunn with Guardians of the Galaxy, he falls into all those constraints, but he still tells such a fun story. It's why I still don't call the MCU an epic. Like, it's not a fantasy epic. It's not a sci-fi epic. It's still just action movies that are linked together with some connecting plot stuff. It's never going to feel like, I'm sure, whatever Denis Villeneuve's Dune's going to be, or the Lord of the Rings movies, because they don't have that gigantic thematic vision that to me really equals an epic.
Definitely. That's really interesting. I never really thought about it that way. So in terms of the DCEU, a note that I made for Zack Snyder's Justice League, I wrote down as I was watching that it felt a lot more like an epic or a story that would be told around a campfire for like weeks at a time rather than a single film. And I don't know, I wrote down a note that I thought if it came out as like a 6 or 7 part series, for me, I would have enjoyed it a little bit more, I think. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I agree. And so you saw like they were split into parts, right? Like the Zack Snyder's Justice League, it had like 3 parts, 4 parts.
Yeah, I mean, it had parts, but I mean, in the sense, like most people when they watch that are still just going to watch it all the way through, I feel like.
Do you like how Zack Snyder tells it? Do you like his visual style?
Yeah, I like his visual style a lot. I think it's beautiful. I thought there was a lot of slow-mo, which got a little old after a while. But I think his movies are always beautiful, but I don't know, it really did just feel long to me. I made this joke early on in the challenge that it should be illegal for movies to be over 3 hours. And obviously, I was somewhat kidding, but it's just hard for me, I think, for anything to sit through like a 4-hour movie. It's going to be tough.
You mentioned like in the MCU, there's a shot in a shed that's just so over the top cinematic, even though you're just like standing in a shed, the lighting is perfect. For me, Zack Snyder does that a lot too, where I remember in his cut of the Justice League, like Lois opens a drawer and like the drawer has this like dramatic shadow on it, and it's just constantly, and I'm like, does she fucking set this up before she like went to open her drawer? Like, you have like the highlight light over here that I have for my like YouTube stuff. It just, everyone looks like that.
That example of Zack Snyder, as well as like the barn scene, do moments like that where you can kind of notice that this is a film, that it's cinematic, and that it's probably not how it would look in real life. I'm wondering, for someone like you who's so into fantasy, does that ever take you out of the experience and make it less enjoyable for you?
I will say, to me, the reason that scene in particular stands out as so jarring is it's not very well done. You can make something look very cinematic and dramatic without it being that overt. I would point to like any of Denis Villeneuve's movies, like Blade Runner 2049. Even when you're just in his crappy apartment, it still manages to look like a crappy apartment while looking very cinematic, because he can just blend the two. It looks more natural. The MCU and Zack Snyder, I feel like they just go so over the top that, yeah, it pulls me out of the movie. I think a really creative, brilliant cinematographer or director can use the constraints of a realistic lighting situation they have to still look very nice and not be so heavy-handed.
I was also wondering, what do you think is the most underrated superhero movie of all time?
Most underrated might be Super, that we just talked about. That one is fantastic, and I know very few people who have seen it. Yeah, I'm gonna stick with Super because so few people have seen it. Though I want to give a shout out to McAvoy's performance in Split, because everyone says it's great, but it's even better than everyone says it is. Like, everyone's like, it's great, and I'm like, no, it's phenomenal.
And that's something I'm definitely a sucker for. a good performance. I have bias towards a movie if a performance is amazing. It makes me feel like the movie as a whole is better, but that's not necessarily fair. And I think a lot of people feel that way about Joker. I think that when I watched it, I realized his performance, Joaquin Phoenix's performance, is unbelievable, but I don't know if the movie as a whole is as amazing as people hype it up to be.
Well, it's Taxi Driver and one other movie I can't remember the name of kind of squashed together, right? Like they just took two movies they know would be great, and I think they structurally just built it around Joaquin Phoenix being Joaquin Phoenix, and the end result is he got an Oscar, and I think he deserved it. But I agree, if that had been nominated for like best screenplay, I would have been like, no. I think villains in general can bring better performances. Like, because heroes are so, like, especially in the MCU or DCU, or unless you're doing something like Super, where they're allowed to be something that's just bonkers, most heroes are either going to be funny, charming, snarky, or like godlike. Whereas the villains, you can do like Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther, where he's clearly having fun with it. Like, I think Robert Downey Jr. is the best hero performance of the MCU. But even then, he's got some constraints on him where they started just blueprinting other characters after him because they were like, that's so good, let's just do that again.
Something I mentioned was that I feel like the villains in both the DCEU and the MCU, for me as an outsider who never read the comics, I've only watched them through once, the villains are just so forgettable oftentimes. Like, I don't even remember a lot of the villains' names. And that might be because I watched each movie literally back to back every single day, so they all get mixed together. But honestly, the only villains I even remember the name of now are like Thanos. Would you agree with that?
There's certainly ones who have stood out, and they're always the ones where it feels like the actor's just having fun. Like Andy Serkis in Black Panther as well. He's just being wild, and I like that. But they're smart occasionally by bringing in someone who's just got a presence. Like Iron Man 1, Obadiah Stane. I remember his name because he was played by an iconic actor who just brought that gravitas. So I think they need to keep that up. And even Taika Waititi in Thor Ragnarok was like, all right, Helen's going to be, or Hela, whatever her name is going to be kind of generic villain. So let's have Jeff Goldblum. Just have him be Jeff Goldblum for an hour, and that'll make up for it. And I think that's smart. But who's your favorite villain, you'd say, of this whole experience?
It's really basic, but I guess the Joker, just because I watched through, obviously, I watched through the old Batman movies when it was Jack Nicholson. And I don't know, I thought it was cool to see three versions of the Joker. I got to see Jack Nicholson, and then I got to see Heath Ledger as well as Joaquin Phoenix. Everyone loves the Joker, but to me, it was just like, it was cool to finally understand what all the hype was about, I think. Who do you think is the best Joker?
Heath Ledger's Joker is overhyped. I said it. I'm sorry. I'm just going to walk away after saying that. It's a very good performance. It's very good, but the mystique around it has become like insane, where people are like, it's the greatest performance ever. It's a very good performance. Joaquin Phoenix's was more impressive, in my opinion.
So I had a few notes when I finished watching through both the MCU and DCEU. A lot of people were commenting like, oh, dude, I've watched Spider-Verse like 40 times. It's amazing and all that. But I made a note that I think there's only 4 movies that I would really have an urge to rewatch a lot, or at least in the next couple months, and that is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, The Dark Knight, Logan, and Split. And I wanted to know, what are your most rewatchable?
That's a good question, and that's a very good list. I have to agree with Into the Spider-Verse just because it's like a visual feast. Like, it's such a beautiful movie, and I imagine that's got to be part of why you chose it as well.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I can't believe. And also, people were commenting that if you pause it on any frame, it looks like a comic book, which I didn't even really realize as I was watching it. It's amazing.
The art team that worked on that, so much respect for it. I'll do that, then I'll go... I enjoy throwing on the original Iron Man just in the background anytime because it's so natural. It felt more on it. It felt more different than any other MCU movie does because it wasn't worrying about any other baggage. It just is telling this character story really well. And then Thor Ragnarok, because I think it's so funny. Like, Korg just kills me every time. Taika Waititi is so funny and so good at directing comedy. I do have a question for you before we get... I know we got some back and forth notes here, but I wanted to ask you, Robert Downey Jr. said he's out and he's not going to come back for Iron Man. You don't get to speak on this kind of stuff very often in your little quick TikTok videos, but would you want to see him come back, or are you happy with him having completed this arc and just walking away?
I would not like to see him come back. I think that it was perfect. I think it's perfect how it is. I think it ended exactly how it should, and I just worry that if they try and bring it back, it would feel forced in some way or just unnecessary. And I don't know, I'm excited for giving other characters a chance to really shine and turn into superstars the same way Iron Man was. Do you feel that turning these movies into a cinematic universe rather than just having them be one-offs? Because the MCU, was that pretty revolutionary when it first started?
I'm sure there was like Frankenstein and Wolfman back in like the 1940s, and there's been some stuff like that, but I don't think anything near the level of like a cohesive vision, without a doubt.
Do you feel that that is overall good, or do you think that it'll get worn out eventually of this universe idea where all these people keep coming together and then they do a single movie to introduce a new character to then throw into the universe? To me, it feels like, I don't know, I felt like a lot of the one-off movies they just felt a little more powerful to me because they stood alone and they didn't try and tie in all these different storylines. But do you think the universe kind of format is just going to continue forever?
Well, what's interesting is everyone who's trying to like replicate it's failing. Like they tried to do this monster cinematic universe. No one wanted that. The DC's struggling to make a profit. It's funny that there's all these copycats, but no one's hitting MCU level. If you would ask me 4 years ago, I would have said there's no way it's going to keep going. It's going to die out. But the box office, it's showing that people are more and more interested than ever. So I just don't know. I think creatively it's constraining, like even just within superheroes. Obviously, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was able to do a lot of stuff it did because it didn't have to worry about anything else. It just told the story it wanted to tell. So I don't know. I agree. Well, I want to ask you, do you agree with Scorsese when he said like the MCU and the superhero movies, they're not cinema, they're just roller coaster rides?
I don't know. I think that's a really tough. I think it's tough. I know a lot of your audience probably totally disagrees, but I think that he actually released an essay after that first article was published. Martin Scorsese released an essay, and there's also a really good video by a YouTuber named Thomas Flight. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he does video essays breaking down different films and directors, and I think his video explained it best. And I really think that Martin Scorsese was maybe like misinterpreted a little bit in what he meant. I feel like, I don't know, I think that there is something distinctly different about these types of films. I wouldn't say they're not cinema. I think that's just wrong. I just think that there is a distinction that needs to be made between superhero movies versus like, I don't know, a movie like The Truman Show or like Blind Spotting. I'm just rattling some off that stand out to me. There's something distinctly different about like what they're trying to accomplish. So no, I don't think they're not cinema. I would disagree with that statement, but I do think that these mega corporations like Marvel, I feel like they're churning out these movies the same way that I feel like Netflix, when you log on, there's always a new show catered directly towards you because they know they can get you to watch it based on your watching habits and like the marketing. Part of me does feel like these superhero movies are a bit like the mega corporations trying to get a quick buck, and they know that obviously that's not to say they're not great. Like some of the movies are great, but I get a totally different viewing experience when I watch a film like Memento by Christopher Nolan versus when I watch Thor or something.
I largely agree. I think calling them not cinema is ridiculous, but I would say they are a product in more of a sense than most movies. I think even within the fantastical genre, like if you look at Fellowship of the Ring versus any MCU movie, this feels more like a passion project over here. It feels more like something that people really wanted to tell. It's, Peter Jackson was a Tolkien fan since he was a boy, and it's like he wanted to craft and capture the themes and the characters perfectly, and you just don't have that in the MCU as much. It's not like, so even within just the genres, there's certain movies that just feel more, I don't want to say authentic, but there's just something about, and I would limit it. I wouldn't say superhero movies in general. I would just say DC, EU, and MCU, because even like Super, which we've mentioned a couple times, doesn't feel like this to me. And that still feels like a cinematic art piece of a sense. Same thing with Split. I would say that was something that it does not feel like it fits into the same genre. So I think there is like this new genre in my mind that's like the product genre. And it's what DCEU and MCU. I hate DCEU. That it does not flow.
It does not at all.
But yeah, that's my take there. Maybe I sound like a pretentious twat, but it just, I don't know. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I always worry like bringing up those points in videos and stuff because anytime you talk about it, it does come off a bit pretentious to people. And I'm not trying to say that, you can't love it. If people love it, I'm happy. I think there are some great movies, but I think you said it best when it does feel like a product that's trying to be marketed and sold to you as opposed to something that has its own unique, message that it's trying to tell and its own something that it's trying to give to society in some way. I don't know. I would agree that they just sometimes feel like soulless projects, I would say.
They're getting more experimental, and I can respect that, especially, I don't know if you've done the shows at all, but they are starting to have some more personality that feels distinct. But even those have not been flawless successes to me. I don't know. I'm very interested in what the superhero films from Disney and stuff like that will look like in 20 years, because I do think there's a shelf life to the current formula.
I get what you're saying. I think there is definitely going to be a shelf life to the point where people are like, all right, we've seen this enough. We want to see something new.
So I think it's interesting. And I got to say, so after 90 days, Pips, I'm sorry, you got to get out of here, buddy. Okay. After 90 days of superhero movies, what's the first movie you're going to go to that's not within these genres?
Oh my God. Yeah, I've been dying to watch something different. I've actually, it's funny you asked that because I decided a couple of months ago, the first thing I want to watch when I'm done with superheroes is like polar opposite. So I've read a lot about Terrence Malick. I don't know if you're familiar with his movies at all, but he is the director of a movie called Tree of Life. And I've never seen it, and I've just read a lot about it, how it's a really philosophical, potentially pretentious film. But yeah, that's what I'm going to go for as soon as I'm done in a week from now.
And will there be a review on the Narwhal TikTok plug here?
Yeah, for sure. I have a ton of other series ideas that I'm trying to plan and just piggyback off of the momentum and the hype. A lot of people want me to watch the shows, which I think I'll do, as well as some of the animated movies like The Incredibles and Lego Batman and all that. Yeah, thank you for having me on the channel. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have not downloaded TikTok, I'm on there as well now. And you can check out Narwhal, who's doing these fantastic reviews, 90 plus of them now. He's torturing himself to get through. Give him a look. He's funny. He's insightful. And it just feels like one of the most genuine reviews on the internet. So I'll have that link down below as well. Like and subscribe if you have not already. And thank you so much for swinging by.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a ton of fun, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Sounds good. Goodbye.